It is January 20th, 2025. Happy Inauguration Day, if that's a thing to say. And per our request a couple weeks ago, we're going to go into some documentation training today, if I can get the words out. We're pretty much going to be going into buyer documents, seller documents, reviewing actual home inspection report, and then going into our independent contractor agreements, and then executing W-9s. So before we get started, I have a little thing about greatness, and I found this from a fortune cookie in Valerie's car. And it said that today's challenges are stepping stones to greatness. So with challenges that we face and overcoming obstacles, refinement through pressure, right? Just as diamonds are formed under pressure, challenges refine your character and prepare you for greater responsibilities. Lessons in disguise. Every challenge holds a lesson. Facing them equips you with the skills and insights necessary for success. And building trust in God, leaning on God during difficulties strengthens your faith and deepens your reliance on his plan for your future. I just realized that, right? Aside from what's happening in the economy and in the world, internally, you're going to come across obstacles and challenges. And overcoming these obstacles is where you grow in your career. So like, for instance, right now, we're about to go into a training about the how. It's like, okay, if I have a seller, how do I get their home listed? And then the what. What is it that I need to actually do that, right? But I just want to remind you before we go into it that none of the how and none of the what is half as important as the why. And that's why our slogan is helping our people elevate through real estate every day, right? Is because we are here to help people increase, help people grow, help people get to their next level in what they want to achieve. So everything is about a collaboration with your clients, with your buyers, with your sellers. So let's go into today's session. So number one, buyer documents. All right, so consulting creates clarity. This is why it's important to chat before showings, right? Before you show a home, it's important to create an environment where you can sit down and invite your clients to have a conversation. Our challenge is that when we're dealing with buyers, for every 1 hour you'd spend with a seller, you're gonna spend at least 4 hours with a buyer. And 9 times out of 10, your buyer wants to start in step 3 or 4 of the process, which is going to see the homes. That's a huge mistake that's often made by rookie agents. I know myself, I spent the first 1 to 2 years starting the process of helping buyers by showing the homes that they want to afford, not necessarily confirming that they can afford it first. So the solution is to slow the process down, which is actually how you speed the process up. So having a conversation and, setting up a coffee actually speeds the process up. And the reason why is because now you're not spinning your wheels. You're able to sit down, consult with them, better understand their situation and their needs, and then discover whether they're actually ready, right? Having them answer a specific set of questions can help give you clarity on, okay, this is where they're at, and this is the information I need to provide them to ensure that they're ready to take the next steps. So one is readiness. Based on the information that you're telling me, it sounds like you're ready. Next, it's willingness. Now I'm going to give you the next best step. And if you do this, then you're expressing the willingness to move forward. AKA, it sounds like you're ready. Sounds like your credit is good. Sounds like you earn enough income. It sounds like you've got your ducks in a row and you have enough money saved up for down payment and closing costs. Now I'm going to give you a link to my lender's mortgage application, assuming you want to work with my lender, my preferred lender, right? And if you so choose to move forward, then that's going to indicate to me that you're willing to proceed. And then there's ableness. That's the lender giving you the thumbs up. Hey, this buyer is qualified. This is how much they'd be pre-approved for. You guys can go ahead and go shopping. That's ableness. That's where we get the term RWA, ready, willing, and able. You invested some time up front with a prospective buyer who's contingent upon the sale of their home. So you qualified them as a buyer first. They're going through the process. They're expressing their willingness. And then their ableness is going to be provided by them selling their home. So let's go into what we have in front of of us. Number one, we have the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Buyer brokerage agreement is a commitment. This is exclusive representation stating that the buyer is deciding to work with you and you are exclusively representing them during the entire buying process. So the key thing on here is the term, from what date to what date, then it's the property, the type of property they're looking for, and the location. In that case, type of property, I usually put what kind of property they're looking for, whether that's a single family home or a condominium. And then location, like unless they know specifically where they want to be at, let's just say Kissimmee, Florida. I'll generalize it like that. If they don't really care where they end up because they want to be wherever they can afford, then I'll just put Central Florida, right? Or you could just put the state of Florida. But basically you just specify everything based on what they're requesting, right? The next page, we have the retainer. And how much should you request on a retainer? Really, that's up to you. Do you want to take a retainer? You don't have to. A retainer is when someone pays a fee to retain your services. If you want to take a retainer fee, then you can just name the amount, and literally it's there because you can exercise it, right? If you feel like you want to test their willingness and you're uncertain about, and you can say, you know what, I charge $1,000 retainer fee. The biggest challenge that most agents would have to overcome with charging a retainer is expressing so much value and not caring if the buyer says no and goes with another agent. Most agents do not charge a retainer fee. So then we have compensation. Compensation, when it comes to purchase or exchange, paragraph 7, item A, I don't use the first portion, which is a dollar sign or percentage sign. I use the second portion. And the reason for that is because I charge 3%, or rather we charge 3% plus a $395 transaction fee of the total purchase price or other consideration for the acquired property, payable no later than the date of closing specified in the sales contract. Now, what happens if we charge 3% on this buyer brokerage agreement, but the seller of a property is only offering 2%? So here's what happens. You, as an agent, have the ability to earn up to the full amount that's written in the agreement, but you don't have to take the full amount. However, on the flip side, if someone's offering 4% buyer commission, you have to modify this buyer brokerage agreement in order to earn up to the higher amount. You cannot earn more than what is written into your buyer brokerage agreement. So if you write that you're only charging $1,000 and not a dollar more, not a penny more than $1,000, that is the maximum you can earn unless you modify the agreement before closing. Okay, moving along to the protection period. If you don't fill in that blank, the protection period is going to be 30 days. What does that mean? That means you present buyer A to listing A, and when you show them listing A, they say they're not interested, they're going to move along. But then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, they say they're under contract on listing A, which you showed to them, but they went under contract with another agent. That is your protection period. That is within your protection period. So you determine if you want a protection period of 30 days, you can leave it blank, or you can say 90 days. If you feel a little iffy, you can say 120 days. That's up to your discretion. Okay. Conditional termination. At the consumer's request, broker may agree to conditionally terminate this agreement, right? So if the broker agrees to terminate it, like meaning your buyer said, hey, I no longer want to work with you. Okay, I agree. We don't have to work with each other. It's up to your discretion whether or not there's a fee for it, right? If you want cost of driving around and utilizing resources to help them find a home, and after 4 months, you may have found them 3-4 options that checked off all their boxes and they still haven't signed. At that point, if they want to cancel and they don't want to move forward, then there can be a fee attached to that as well. So not only can you charge a retainer, but you can also charge a termination fee. Assignment. Broker may assign this agreement to another broker, right? So this is stating like, hey, you have a buyer who signed this agreement, which technically is to a row of real estate, but you decide to go to Coldwell Banker next week. The agreement with your buyers is with us, not with you as a sales associate. So it's up to our discretion to let that agreement go to the next broker. And you say, hey, I'm leaving and I'm taking all of my buyers with me. And then of course, brokerage relationship. And this is stating that we are acting as transaction brokers, not as single agents. agents with this client. So then you have the acknowledgement, right? And it's basically stating the consumer has read the agreement and understands its contents. And then they're going to sign on this page, date this page. You, as an authorized associate, sign and date this page, and then they initial at the bottom. And that's pretty much the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. The next agreement is the showing agreement. So this is a more limited agreement that outlines our role specifically for just showing properties. And this is usually predetermined properties or a list of properties. This agreement here is basically stating who's who, right? The agreement between the consumer and broker. And then it states that everything in this agreement, which is very similar to the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, except for the fact that it only pertains to the properties that you have listed on this agreement. So here's what I would do if I was utilizing the showing agreement, because this agreement can literally just be, it can just be just for a few hours. You can set it to where it's like, I'm going to show you homes from 4 o'clock today until 7 o'clock in the evening. And then you just list the properties that you went to, but you have them sign it beforehand. So then the other agreement after that is the modification to either or. So basically you list out consumer, broker, and then you check whichever one applies to you. If there's going to be a termination, then that's the modification. If you're going to terminate the agreement early, then you would check that box. If the compensation is going to change, then you would check the second box, right? And then it reiterates that same bold statement, right? Then if you're going to change your protection period, then you check that third box. Cancellation fee, if there's going to be a change to that, or if there's an agreement to conditionally terminate the agreement. And then the final option before other is the broker and consumer hereby agree to unconditionally terminate the agreement. That means it's a mutual release. There's no conditions to that agreement. And it's just, you're going your separate ways. And then other, of course, if you guys have something else that you want to modify, then you have them sign, date, you sign, date, and you provide them a copy within a 24-hour period. And typically, unless you guys are going to terminate it, the only other thing that I see really a use case for is mostly for if there's any adjustments in the compensation. All right, so we're going to go into seller documents. So proper preparation positions sellers for property perfection. Not that the property would be perfect, but the property would be positioned to be considered market ready. And this is why, Joe, I was telling you, you don't prepare the property 2 hours before the photographer shows up, right? So now we're going into the seller documentation. I do have a couple pointers here, especially for instance, a seller like Thomas, right? You want to prioritize when they seem resistant and they've already made a couple of attempts, especially when they've already made a couple of attempts in listing their property with an agent. You want to prioritize their goals. Forget about people, forget about process, forget about who you are. Right? It has nothing to do with you. Forget about the process. They don't care about the process. They don't care about the paperwork. All they care about is what their goal is. And you want to level with them in that them understanding that you are the one to work with because you understand their needs and you can collaborate with them in order to give them the confidence that you're the one, right? A couple of things that I did with Solano, right, was for instance, the whole thing of opening up. At one point, me and Danny, it felt like we were cornering him on his own property, right? So I wanted to open up the space. So I opened up my body language and stepped away from the triangle, right? So that he didn't feel cornered. Then as we were talking about something he had to take care of on the driveway, he was also removing bricks and putting it off to the side because he was expressing what he was going to do. So I mirrored him. I literally started picking bricks up with him and moving them to the side so that the body language that he's getting from me is that I'm collaborating with him and I'm helping him. It starts to build up confidence and trust that I'm there to lend a hand. And then I'm also agreeing with him with the ideas, what he's expressing. Hey, he was like, oh, well, let me tell you what I want to do, because it's about him. It's about what he wants to accomplish and what he feels would add value to the property. And then I either confirm or say, hey, well, I like that idea. That's actually a great idea. And there was something else that he expressed that I was like, listen, and I think that he expressed this over the phone. I told him, I don't want you to overspend on what's going to give you the least ROI. So now he starts to see okay, now I'm starting to get a little bit more insight from a broker who's actually in the industry versus me. I'm just trying to get my license and I think I'm an investor in real estate. right? And then that sequence of events opened up to where he was barking at first about the whole 6% commission, right? Because his previous agent, I guess she had him at a 4%, and that's probably why he signed with her so quickly, right? Because she was not a qualified agent to represent that listing, and we know that based on how she requested information or did not request information, right? He opened up, he provided leases, provided the home inspection, and now he's more leaning on me for more insight, and also has a plan to list with us at X date, end of February, early March. So the key thing is highlighting collaboration and outcome oriented service, and that cuts through surface level concerns, right? It doesn't matter that they list with you, they can list with anybody. Everybody knows a handful of agents. It doesn't matter what your process is, they're going to go through a fairly similar process and paperwork whether the agent is organized or not. It doesn't matter what the price is at a certain point. Right now in today's market, forget the price. Don't get hung up on, hey, your property is not worth this. Stack the listing. Get the listing. The Rockville listing, we started at $525. We ended at $471. The price does not matter. If they want to list higher than market value, that's cool. But then increase what is required for them to help you increase the value of the property through its presentation. So like, for instance, okay, I gave Thomas a quote. If you want the most, you got to do the most. It sounds like you have an idea of like what the marketplace wants to see to get top dollar buyer. Okay, so again, that's just me in agreement with him, reinforcing his belief. He believes he can get a certain amount of value. But then when I shared the statistic with him about homes, sellers are getting 97.3% of listing value. Again, this is over the phone. And I shared if somebody came at you with an offer of 582, would you take it? Yes, right away. So now I'm already breaking down what he appears on the forefront to be firm on. He doesn't even realize that this is what's happening. I'm agreeing with him on his perception of the value of the property, but then I'm also breaking down to him like, hey, this is what's happening in the marketplace. If this scenario presents itself, are you going to move forward? Now I got his ready, willingness, and ableness programmed on my end internally, right? That's the psychology behind it. So now you get to gauge what their goals are. And I always tell people, goal oriented, solution based, and results driven, right? Because I don't get paid until the results are delivered, right? So if it takes a whole year to sell this property, I don't get paid until the results are there, right? And that's being able to carry it to closing. Don't get hung up on what we think we know about the marketplace. Disagreeing about value, for instance, would make the listing go to another agent. Prioritizing the goals to the clients is what's gonna give them the feeling that you're on their side and you want to help them accomplish their goal, regardless of what it may look like. Again, this is why the why is more important than the what and the how. Because on multiple occasions, I've helped sellers achieve a price point that's higher than anything else in the neighborhood. But again, that's based on their willingness. You want to get the most, you got to do the most. So the property utilities and additional information sheet is internal for us if we have to manage anything related to the property, right, pertaining to utilities. Let's say a home is vacant and you have to be the one to connect the utilities in order for it to show the right way, right, or in order for it to be photographed the right way. And you want to know the utilities, but more importantly, what makes you look professional as a listing agent is when it's ready to be passed on to the buyer, are you able to pass on this information to the buyer if you represent them, and or the buyer's agent if they're represented by someone else, so that they know who their service providers are, what the HOA contact information is, and HOA information, as well as the trash. Then we have the transaction coordination sheet. So this is again for internal use, right? When is the listing going live? Should we order a post installation? Should we schedule the photo shoot? And then how to access the property and the contact information for the parties involved on our side, right? Seller name, phone, and email, title company, and if there's a referral agent on the deal. Then, if applicable, the HOA community disclosure. So for this document, you're just getting the information about the name of the community and what the HOA rates are. There's no signature required from the seller, just initials. And on the second page, you're showing whether or not there's any special assessments or additional fees, and then providing the HOA contact information. So this is gonna feel redundant to the property utilities and additional information, but basically when you collect it from one, you'll have it for the other. What I like to do is I like to go to other listings. If you know you're getting a listing, go to other active or most recently closed listings from that community and we'll extract that information from there before you go on the appointment. And that's less time your seller has to spend getting that information to you. And then all they have to do is initial that first page. All right, moving along. Compliance with the lead-based paint law. So this is just for the listing side, right? And this is basically your seller acknowledging that they either do or do not have any knowledge of there being lead-based paint present on property. This is required when you're listing a property. However, the lead-based paint disclosure is not required if the property was built after 1978. If a property was built before 1978, before 1978, right? Did I say before? If it was built before 1978, it requires a lead-based paint disclosure. If it was built after, it does not require a lead-based paint disclosure, right? So Solano's property built in 1903, it requires a lead-based paint disclosure. So you would have to have your seller execute this for us, our compliance documents, and then they would have to sign the addendum for the lead-based paint disclosure for the buyers to acknowledge as well. Next, we have the seller's property disclosure. This document is not for us to fill out at all, ever. This is the seller's property disclosure. That means you let them fill it out and sign it. The most I would do pertaining to this is literally ask them the questions and let them give me the answer, and then I'll notate it for them. That's the most I would do, but only if the answer comes from them themselves, right? Don't compromise yourself. It is better to leave this with them as homework, let them fill it out on their own time, and then you circle back and say, hey, the next time I'm back here to meet with you, have this document completed with you and your spouse. Or if it's just dumb, then dumb, right? And then just have it highlighted everywhere where they should initial and sign. Basically, this property disclosure is very simple. Yes, no, or don't know. If they don't understand the question, I would just suggest for them to check off don't know, because that's what it is. This is a disclosure based on what they actually know pertaining to the property. Okay, this next one is very important. The wire fraud prevention notice. Okay, so basically this is letting your clients know, right? Because this is for buyers and or sellers. You should always have your buyers and sellers sign this document. This is basically giving them notice not to do anything pertaining to anything with wires unless the information was provided for by you or a third party that you recommend and connected them with. That means if they get any emails telling them to do anything with any bank information or providing any details pertaining to their closing, always to verify it before doing anything. I have a seller, it was a buyer for a condo in summer of 2023. They got an email that appeared to be legitimate saying, hey, wire XYZ funds to XYZ account. Luckily, they called me before they took action because it was around the time that we were closing on their transaction. So if they would have followed those instructions, they would have sent literally the money for closing to someone else and we wouldn't have closed on our unit. People are always phishing. Hackers are always phishing, especially for real estate agents, because we are managing high ticket transactions and because we're putting our information out there constantly, right? So all it takes is for them to create a Gmail account with your name and they'll put like Joe K. Kaminsky at gmail.com. So if your buyer's not looking and they don't see that second K slipped in there, all of a sudden they trust you so much, they're following whatever else and they put the signature, copying your signature, and they do everything copying your information. So if they put Valerie Million Bones and your client just trusts and has full-blown confidence and they're just doing things on the whim according to what you tell them and they don't pay attention to the details, then they're out sending money to someone who's just going to run away with it and it's unprotected. Okay, so we have the two most important documents here. One of them is the listing agreement. The listing agreement outlines exactly what you and your seller agree to for the sale of their home. And then the other one is the residential listing data entry form. The residential listing data entry form is the longest document here. It's 13 pages. But before we get there, let's go into the listing agreement. So just like the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, the exclusive brokerage listing agreement is exactly that. It's exclusive, an expression of the seller exclusively listing the property with you. And so the seller is giving us authority to be their exclusive broker, meaning they're not listing the property with anybody else. And these are the terms, these are the dates, right? Let's say now that homes are taking longer to sell, we're reverting back to the year-long listing agreements, which is what we were at when I first started in 2017, right? We were doing year-long listing agreements. Just like 3-4 years ago, I was getting sellers telling me, like, literally, I would send a 6-month agreement over and they were like, well, I don't think you should need more than 3 months. Right? But that's because homes were selling within hours. So I would, in some cases it caught me off guard because I'm like, so what are you saying? You need me to change that? Like, if we know that, then why, what's the big deal with a 6-month agreement? We know we're doing what it takes to sell the property, right? Regardless of how fast it's going to sell. So anyways, now we're reverting back to the year long, right? Because sellers are aware that homes are taking 4, 5, 6 months to sell. And you don't want to, it's one of those tedious things that you don't want to have to constantly go back to your seller just to extend a listing, right? The Altamont Springs listing, it was due to end, what was it, December 10th? And I said, you know what, let's give it a break over the holidays, but let's extend the listing out until July. And let's give it peak season to procure the right buyer. Things like that. What we did was we adjusted the listing to be temporarily off market and then extended the term of the original listing agreement. So we didn't take it off entirely and then put in a new listing. It's just temporarily off market status. All right, then you have the property details, right? The occupancy. Then you have the price and terms. That's usually the last thing that I fill out because we haven't determined what the price is going to be yet. The financing terms is, according to the seller, what is an allowable financing term to them? What is acceptable to them? If you're at a certain price point, then you're not going to include FHA. You're likely not going to include FHA and VA buyers. So then you're just going to have cash, conventional, or other, which means like if somebody wants to purchase with a non-QM loan, a non-qualified mortgage, or if somebody wants to purchase with a DSCR loan, right? If it's an investment property and it can be operated as a business, then you have whether or not the seller is willing to do seller financing. And so that particular section, that paragraph 3, is just what is acceptable to the buyer, to the seller. You notice, depending on the profile of your seller, entrepreneur sellers are going to be the ones that are more open to creative concepts. People who are not necessarily entrepreneurs and they own homes under $500,000, they're going to be like more drawn to what's traditional and considered standard. Right? Broker obligations, what we're obligated to do on behalf of the sellers. Then the MLS, where the property is going to be listed. Our authority, what the seller authorizes us to do. The seller can opt out of the MLS and they can opt out from the property being made public. So then, hey, you're marketing an off-market, private, exclusive opportunity, right? Some people want to protect their privacy. That is more popular in the luxury realm, in property owners of multi-million dollar properties where they don't want their property to be all out in the internet like that. So that is where networking comes in. Then there's the seller's obligation. The seller's obligations basically state that the seller is willing to cooperate with you on the process of selling the home. Then we have compensation. Compensation is basically what you are charging your sellers, percentage of the total purchase price plus any additional fees, no later than the date of closing specified in the sales contract. However, closing is not a prerequisite for broker's fee being earned. Then there's the percentage or dollar amount for consideration paid on an option, and then lease value if those options are exercised. And then it has the broker's fee is due in the following circumstances, right? So let's just say property is transferred to someone else through another means with the assistance of any real estate licensee. And they basically transfer the property in another way without you directly selling the home. You could be due for compensation. Let's say the seller refuses or fails to sign an offer at the price and terms stated in this agreement, right? So if you brought the same way you show a buyer a property that checks off all the boxes and you expect them to move forward on the purchase, right? Because you delivered the result, they could be due to pay compensation. If within termination date, there's a protection period as well here. So let's say you terminate the agreement and 5 days later, the seller accepts an offer from a buyer that you presented to them. That falls within the protection period, depending on how many days you set there. Retained deposits. As consideration for broker services, broker is entitled to receive, put it in there now, 50%. I would say 50% of all deposits that seller retains as liquidated damages for a buyer's default in a transaction, not to exceed the paragraph 8A fee. So that's like to state if a buyer defaults and you are able to retain a $5,000 earnest money deposit, then you would get half of that deposit. Then we have the notice to seller regarding buyer brokers. And this is basically stating to them that the buyer's broker, so buyer's broker may include this broker if broker also works with buyer on this transaction. If this occurs during seller is advised and is aware that seller may but is not required to compensate the buyer's broker upon closing. Seller may choose to enter into a separate written agreement to pay buyer's broker or may approve broker to pay buyer's broker in accordance with paragraph 10. So that means the seller is aware that they don't have to pay the buyer's broker, and they're also aware that they can pay the buyer's broker with a separate sheet of paper, with a separate agreement stating right now there is and this is when we go on a deep dive on this, but there's the seller to pay buyer's broker agreement. Then there's the seller's broker to pay the buyer's broker agreement. And then there's I can't recall the rest of them, but basically it's the separate agreements on how a buyer's broker can be paid. The following section is the compensation to buyer's brokers. So this would state seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to a buyer's broker in the amount of blank or blank. So either a flat fee or a percentage fee. And then seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from seller. That means they're acknowledging that they're going to sign and authorize how much they're going to pay the buyer's broker. Or option C, no compensation will be offered to buyer's broker. We are in a transaction broker state. So always we're going to have the first option checked off. Act as a transaction broker. Of course, as a single agent, you're working specifically for the seller unless they sign a consent to transition to a transaction broker. Or if you don't have a relationship with the seller, then you would select the last option. Then conditional termination. This is the funny part. When Joe and I were going over this for his listing. Cancellation fee. If a seller decides to cancel in the middle of the agreement and you've already listed the property, you've already invested in photos, you started running ads, all this stuff to expose the property, and they say, you know what, we no longer want to sell. How much are you entitled to? Whatever you put in the cancellation fee. My suggestion, 0.5% of the listing value. 0.05% of the listing value. So half of 1% of the listing value. It's always so confusing. Did we get it right? So when I joined Compass and I was with Tiffany Pantozzi, she taught me that. To do it percentage based and do half of 1%. Ultimately, she didn't have a conversation with a financial person if she's still doing it that way, right? Because it makes sense. If you're investing roughly between, 0.25% to 1% in marketing, right, for a property, then you want to be at least cover your cost and recover your cost for whatever you put out there to expose the property. Because we're promising to cover photography, we're promising to run Facebook ads and do all this digital marketing. We're gonna do this video work. So at least do it to where it makes sense, to where your costs are covered should they decide, just like the buyers, right? They canceled, they decided to not move forward on the purchase of the home. So on the flip side with your sellers, if they say, you know what, I'm not relocating, I don't have to switch my job, I'm just gonna stay in town, down and we no longer want to sell, we want to stay, they should at least cover the cost of what you invested to market the property. Thinking high level as a real estate agent, what you want to do is you want to leverage any opportunity to expose yourself and your business to the marketplace. The point of a listing is not just to sell the listing. Yes, you are listing the property to help the owner sell the property, but that is not the sole purpose of listing a property. The purpose of listing a property is to bring the property to the marketplace and effectively market the home or the property, is to leverage your position in the marketplace and earn more business, and to expose your services to the marketplace, to the masses, right? The more people see you, the more top of mind. That's why people know certain names like Peter Lou. Then we have the dispute resolution clause, miscellaneous stuff, basically stating that this agreement would be passed down to, let's say a seller passes away, it passes down to their heirs, right? If it happens within the period of the agreement. If I pass away and one of my daughters take over the business, which it won't happen at this age, and they're licensed agents, they will take over on this agreement, right? That's what's happening under miscellaneous. And then additional terms, if there's anything additional, which usually I put in there, that the photos that we pay for is ours. Why do I do that? Because we're paying for it. So not only would they have to reimburse us through the cancellation fee, let's say they cancel with you and then they have the audacity to tell the other agent that, hey, yeah, you could use those photos to promote my listing. Public remarks, realtor only remarks, and driving directions. In driving directions, and we learned this from MLS compliance course, you cannot just put in there, use the GPS. Realtor only remarks, you cannot anything related to offering a buyer's brokerage commission. You cannot put anything related to commission. Don't put anything related to commission in this listing. And then public remarks, and then for the creating a free automatic virtual tour, always hit no on that, because it creates a cheesy slideshow with the photos of the listing, and we don't like cheesy. We like our virtual tours. Public remarks, you just want to make sure you're not violating any HUD guidelines. So like that, a lot of the buyers and the people who come in who do take the time to review the actual listing, they have as much information as possible up front. And then also it helps to produce what's called a cheat sheet that you have handy and available to you, which has like the information of what are the most common questions that buyers ask when they're on tour. So check this out. For listings, you want to strategize every move, right? From preparation to executing, align the team, and execute the game plan. And then here we have the guide from Framed Listings on all the suggestions for you to make for every area of the home. So this is gold. You give that to them beforehand and send them an email briefing them on that, and a link to the YouTube video explaining to them about how to prepare their home for photos. We are gonna go over this home inspection report, right? And we're gonna go over this inspection report, and basically with the home inspection report, you want to analyze, assist, and take action towards an agreeable acceptance, right, of the home inspection report.